A spinster of 30 seasons, a scandalous duke, one bet, and no escape. That was the shape of the evening, although Diana Whitmore did not know it yet, standing behind a curtain in her aunt's drawing room with her father's mourning ribbon wound twice round her smallest finger and the polite silence of 9 seasons in her throat. The wager was settled in the small drawing room behind the great one, with a sherry decanter sweating on the side table and a clock that had been 3 minutes fast since the Regency was new. Diana heard it through the velvet of the curtain that divided her aunt's parlour from her aunt's library. Heard it the way a person hears the snap of a fan in a quiet room, or the first crack of ice on a pond that has been frozen too long. The voice she heard belonged to Lord Brookings, and the voice that answered belonged, of all the unlucky tongues in London, to the Duke of Carwell. 3,000 guineas, said Brookings, in the tone of a man amused by his own daring. 3,000 guineas, Carwell, if you can have the spinster of 9 seasons, Diana Whitmore, the 30-year-old of the Whitmore branch, the one all the mothers have given up on your arm at the Hartwell ball within a fortnight. A laugh came back to him, low and gentlemanly, and entirely unsurprised. One bet, said the Duke. Done. There can be no escape from the bet honestly made. Diana stood perfectly still behind the curtain, and let the words travel down through the bones of her wrist, where her father's mourning ribbon, a length of black grosgrain she had been winding around 2 fingers for 9 seasons, was warm against her pulse. She was not 30. She was 27 and 3 months, and her father had been gone 4 of those years, and her brother's career was about to be ended by a man who had carried the Whitmore name in him longer than Diana had carried this ribbon. Now, in addition to those small inconveniences, a duke whose ruined reputations were the talk of 3 counties had just bought her by the season, for 3,000 guineas, and the favour of saying he had done it. Through the gap of the curtain, she watched the Duke set down his glass. He had broad shoulders that the cut of his indigo coat did nothing to soften. His dark hair caught the candle, and was a little careless at the nape, and a heavy signet ring on his right hand turned once on his finger, as if he were considering whether to put it away. He looked, Diana thought, like a man who had been forced into elegance by the same accident that had forced him into the title. Then he laughed again, the laugh of a man who had decided he was going to enjoy the next fortnight. And Diana stepped from behind the curtain into the lamplight, with her father's ribbon still wound between her fingers. 3,000 guineas, Your Grace, she said. Surely a girl of 9 seasons is worth 4. It was a small drawing room, and the silence that fell into it had nowhere to go. Brookings, a slim, fair gentleman whose grin had been earning him invitations for a decade, went white from his collar up. The Duke of Carwell did not move. He had a very still face when surprised, Diana noted, with a kind of clinical interest, the bones of it settling into place the way water finds its level after a stone is dropped. His eyes, grey-green, the colour the river took at Hartwell on certain November afternoons, found her and stayed. After a moment, he set down his sherry glass with a soft click on the marble side table and inclined his head a half-inch, the way one inclines to an opponent who has revealed an unexpected weapon. Miss Whitmore, he said. The tone gave nothing away. The tone of a man who had been caught and refused to be ashamed of being caught. I had understood the inner drawing room was empty. It was, Diana said, until it was not. The thing about drawing rooms is that they are full of women, Your Grace. We do not announce ourselves the way men do. Brookings made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cough. He had gone from white to a hot pink. Diana, he said, forgive me. Forgive us. We did not. You did not know I was behind a curtain, Lord Brookings. No. That is generally the point of a curtain. She kept her voice light. The trick she had spent 9 seasons learning, was to keep the voice light and the spine very straight, and to give the lamp time to find the angle that flattered her best. Because in a drawing room in November, a woman is the architecture of her own performance, And Diana Whitmore had been architecture for so long, she could have drawn her own plan on the back of a card. She crossed slowly to the side table. She poured herself a thin glass of the sherry the Duke had been drinking. She tasted it. She found it indifferent. She put it down. The two men watched her the way two men watch a hawk decide whether to come to the glove. "I should like," said Diana, "to make a counter-offer." She lifted her eyes from the glass to the Duke. The candlelight caught the grosgrain ribbon at her wrist and made it shine like wet stone. "You will have me on your arm at the Hartwell ball within a fortnight, Your Grace. I will not refuse you. I will not flinch at your name in the room. I will be charming, and I will be quiet, which together produce the impression in our society that a woman is intelligent. And as I am, in fact, intelligent, the impression will be sustainable for the requisite 2 weeks." She paused. She let the silence hold. "In exchange, you will use the vote that is held in your name on the Lords' Subcommittee for Army Estimates to clear my brother Captain Henry Whitmore of the embezzlement that has been brought against him at Horse Guards. You will know, by the end of this fortnight, whose ledger that money truly came from. You will tell the subcommittee. You will tell them by your own mouth, in the chamber, on the morning of the Hartwell ball." She set the glass down. The sound of it on the marble was very small. "Then I will go with you to the ball, and you will have your 3,000 guineas from Lord Brookings, and I will have my brother. One bet, Your Grace. No escape. For either of us." The clock, that had been 3 minutes fast, struck the half-hour. 2 long-sustained chimes that fell into the silence like coins onto velvet. Brookings, for a moment, looked at Diana as if he had never seen her before. And, in a sense, he had not, because for 9 seasons, Diana Whitmore had been a slim, dark auburn shape in his peripheral vision, sitting on a settee near her aunt, polite, well-spoken, and quite reliably unimportant. The Duke's signet ring had not moved on his finger. After a long count, he reached up, slowly, as if not to startle her, and set the back of his ring against his teeth, and tapped twice, a sound so soft Diana would not have heard it if she had not been listening for some movement that proved he was alive in the room with her. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "are you proposing a contract?" "I am proposing a bargain. Contracts are written in ink. Bargains are written in honor. I have read your reputation. I assume you possess sufficient quantities of the latter to dispense with the former." A muscle moved at the corner of his mouth. It was not a smile. It was the place where a smile would have begun if he had permitted it. "And if I refuse?" "Then I shall walk into the Hartwell ball on my brother's arm, in his regimental coat, Your Grace. And you will not have me on yours. And Lord Brookings will keep his 3,000 guineas. And you will keep your reputation as a man who cannot deliver a bet honestly made." She picked up the ribbon at her wrist and wound it once around her smallest finger. "I do not threaten, Your Grace. I am simply telling you what will be the case at the end of the fortnight, if you and I are not in agreement at the beginning of it." He looked at her for the length of 3 breaths. Beside her, a lump of coal in the grate cracked, and the sound seemed to wake the Duke from a thought he had been holding very still. He stepped forward, not towards Diana, but towards the side table. He picked up his sherry. He finished it. He set the glass down with the precision of a man placing a piece in a game he had not realized he was playing. "I have not," he said, "in my life, met a woman who has outmaneuvered me before the second sentence. There is a first occasion for everything, Your Grace. I imagine even the small infelicity of being interrupted by a curtain is a sort of education." "It is, Miss Whitmore, it is." He inclined his head again, lower this time. "I accept your bargain. We are agreed." Diana finished winding the ribbon. She let it lie, dark and shining, against her wrist. "Then good evening, Your Grace. Good evening, Lord Brookings. I shall send you the details of my brother's case in the morning, by the breakfast post, if my aunt's footman is awake." She walked out of the small drawing room without looking back. Only when she had reached the corridor and the closed door, and the safety of 3 further doors between her and the laugh she had heard, did her hand begin to shake in the controlled small tremor of a woman who has just lifted something heavier than she had any business lifting. In the corridor, her aunt, Aunt Cordelia Whitmore, later Bath, presently of Half Moon Street, 64 years of age and the deadpan of London, was sitting on the velvet bench by the stairs with a tisane in her hand and an expression so calm it could only have been cultivated through long marriage. "How did it go, dear?" said Aunt Cordelia, not looking up. "I have agreed to walk into the Hartwell ball on the Duke of Carwell's arm within a fortnight." "Have you, indeed?" "In exchange for the saving of Henry's commission." "Ah," said Aunt Cordelia. She took a delicate sip. "Well, I always said, dear, if you must marry a scoundrel, marry the kind who can be trained, not the kind who can be cured. You have shown unusual sense in choosing the first." "I am not marrying him, Aunt." "Of course you are not, dear. Of course you are not." Aunt Cordelia set down her cup and folded her hands. "Sit down a moment. You are shaking. We must compose your face before we go up. The maids gossip." Diana sat. Diana shook. Aunt Cordelia, with the calm of a woman who had survived 3 campaigns in 3 different colonies on the strength of correct posture alone, took the ribbon at Diana's wrist and unwound it once, and set Diana's hand flat upon her own knee. "Breathe, child. The Duke can wait. He has 14 days. The clock above them, a smaller clock, slow by 2 minutes, which the Whitmore household had refused to correct out of family principle, struck the 3/4 hour, and Diana breathed. The fortnight had begun. 2 streets away, Adrian Crewe Halland, 7th Duke of Carwell by an accident of horse and a slope of frozen turf the year he had turned 22, sat in the study his elder brother had once occupied. He looked at a portrait he had not turned to face the wall, though he had thought of it 100 times. The portrait was a small one, oils on canvas, of a young officer in scarlet, with the impossible cheekbones of the previous duke. The varnish had darkened along one edge. The gilt of the frame was warm where the lamp touched it, and cold a hand's breadth away. His brother, Edward. He had not been able to bring himself to say the name out loud since the year of the accident, which was 6 years ago next month, although the Duke had been told often by the family solicitor, in the careful tones of professional sympathy, that this was a matter requiring time, and that time alone was sufficient to mend it. He thought, looking up at the portrait now, breathing in the faint smell of linseed and old smoke from the cold grate, that the family solicitor knew remarkably little about time. A coal moved in the grate of his own study with a sound like a small bone settling. The Duke did not look at it. He looked instead at the paper in his hand, which was a letter from the Secretary of the Lords Subcommittee on Army Estimates, respectfully requesting his lordship's attendance at the next sitting, his lordship having been pleased to lend his name to the membership through his late brother's estate. He read it 3 times. He did not enjoy reading any of the times. He was not, by inclination, a man of committees. He was not a man of votes. He was a man of horses, and a closed-down country house at Hartwell, and the company of 6 old friends, whom he tolerated because they had known him before the title. His only sustained relationship with public conscience had been the careful avoidance of it. Now a girl of 9 seasons, 27 possibly by the look of her hands, although Brookings had been firm on 30, and walked through a curtain and made him a player in the army estimates. He set the signet ring against his teeth and tapped twice. The ring was his brother's. He had taken it from a writing desk drawer the morning of the accident, and had worn it ever since. "Edward," he said, very quietly, to the closed door of the study, where no servant could hear. "I have been outmaneuvered by a girl with a ribbon. I think I am in some trouble." He laughed. It surprised him. It was not the laugh of the small drawing room, the bet laugh, the friend laugh, the public laugh he had spent 6 years perfecting. It was a different laugh, smaller, more honest. The laugh of a man caught out by a verse in a book he had not known he was reading. He put down the secretary's letter. He poured himself a brandy. He did not drink it. He sat for a long time in the chair his brother had sat in, and watched the clock that had been wrong since the accident. In the morning, Diana sent her brother's case to Half Moon Street by Aunt Cordelia's footman, as she had promised. An hour later, a card was returned to her by the same route, in a hand she had not seen before, but understood at once. Black ink, decided strokes, no flourishes. The hand of a man unaccustomed to writing his own correspondence, and faintly embarrassed by it. The card said, "Miss Whitmore, the Carwell Library awaits you at 11. There is coffee. There are no curtains. C." She held the card a moment. She set it on the writing desk with the deliberateness of a woman placing a piece in a game she had been forced into and had decided to win. Then she wound the black grosgrain ribbon twice around her fingers and got up to dress. She arrived at Carwell House at 4 minutes past 11, which she had calculated to the second. Early enough not to insult, late enough not to seem eager, and was received by a butler whose face was professionally blank, but who, when he turned to lead her up the stairs, gave her a look that was the butler equivalent of a marching band. The Carwell Library was a long room on the first floor, with windows facing south of the small garden and a fireplace tall enough to walk into. The books rose to the ceiling, and the air smelled of leather and beeswax, and a faint background of cold ash from a fire that had been allowed to die overnight. The Duke of Carwell stood at the writing table with his sleeves rolled to the elbow and a folded paper in his hand. Diana saw in the morning light of a window unsoftened by curtains, that his forearms were the forearms of a man who had ridden cross-country every dawn of his adult life and had not lost the trick of it. The way his shirt cuff rested above the bracelet of bone at his wrist was the cuff of a body that did not soften because the title was upon it. He looked up. He had grey-green eyes and a careful mouth, and dark hair that had been combed and then ignored. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Your Grace?" She stopped at the centre of the carpet. "I have come at 11. The library has no curtains. I have not brought a chaperone, because my Aunt Cordelia has decreed that as we are conducting a public bargain, we may as well dispense with the public hypocrisies." His mouth, that careful mouth, moved a fraction. "Aunt Cordelia would, I think, terrify my mother." "Aunt Cordelia would, I think, manage your mother for tea." "Then the war is on terms unfavourable to my mother." "Aunt Cordelia is generally on terms unfavourable to mothers, Your Grace. It is one of her abiding pleasures." He inclined his head. He gestured to a small table by the fireplace, where a coffee pot of black japanned tin and 2 cups stood ready. "Coffee?" "Without sugar." He paused, and Diana saw the pause, saw the moment of correction in him, saw that he had been about to ring for the housekeeper and had chosen to pour for her himself. He poured. He handed her the cup. The fingers of his hand were broad and a little marked at the knuckles, the way fingers are marked by years of holding reins in cold mornings. The cup made a small, dry sound when he set it into her palm. She did not let her own fingers tremble. She had a long practice at not letting them tremble. "You have read the papers I sent?" She made it a statement, not a question. "I have read them, Miss Whitmore. They are very thorough." "I am thorough. My brother is charming. The combination is rare in a family, but not unheard of." A flicker, again, at the corner of his mouth, and Diana realized, with the small interior shock of an unexpected weather, that the Duke of Carwell was harder to amuse than she had been led to believe. When he was amused, the muscle that moved was always the same muscle, near the right corner of the mouth, and this was the muscle she would be watching for the next 14 days, as one watches a single window in a darkened street. "The case against your brother turns," said the Duke, "on the testimony of a man called Pettigrew. He is a clerk at Horse Guards. He has identified the entries in the regimental fund's ledger as having been entered by your brother's hand." "Yes." "Has anyone considered that Pettigrew's testimony rests on the assumption that Captain Whitmore's hand could be reliably identified, when in fact The entries you sent me last night were written in a hand that is unmistakably not your brother's. Diana set down her cup. She did not say anything for a count of 3. He had read it. He had read it carefully. "Your Grace," she said, "I am not accustomed to being met halfway." "I imagine not, Miss Whitmore. In my experience, a person who has been met halfway over a number of years stops doing the walking themselves. You have walked an unusual distance. Sit down." She sat. The chair was velvet and old and warm in the south light, and her cup made a quiet click on the table. "The forger," she said, "is a man called Vine. He is also a clerk at Horse Guards. He has been on Lord Marbury's household payroll for 4 years, and on the regimental funds payroll for 2. Marbury. The Duke set his coffee down. He had gone very still. He was not, Diana thought, a man whose stillness meant approval. "Marbury is my mother's cousin." "I know, Your Grace." "He is also your great-uncle." "I know that as well." "And he sits on the subcommittee for army estimates." "He chairs it, Your Grace." "Yes." A pause. "He does." The Duke turned the signet ring slowly on his finger. He looked at the fire for a long moment, at the bed of cold ash where nothing had been burning for several hours, and then he looked at Diana. Diana saw, in the look, the moment a man comes to a private conclusion that will cost him a great deal, and decides, on his own ground, and without any visible flinching, that he will pay it. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I will tell you something I have never said aloud. I do not, in the ordinary way, take an interest in the work of the Lords. I have lent my name to the membership of the subcommittee because the title required it, and because my brother had taken the seat before me. I have not, in 3 years, spoken from it. I have not, in 3 years, voted from it." He set his hand flat on the writing table. The signet ring caught the south light. "I have, in 3 years, attended 4 sittings, all of them brief, all of them by request, all of them on matters where my silence was preferable to a Marbury vote of confidence. You are about to require me to break that silence. Are you certain you wish to?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Are you certain you wish to know what that breaking will cost me?" "I know what the keeping of it will cost my brother. Yes." He inclined his head. It was the smallest of motions. It was, Diana understood, an act of homage. "Then we are, Miss Whitmore, in business." He smiled. It was a real smile, brief and surprised at itself, and it changed the cast of his face entirely. Diana looked down at her coffee. The grosgrain ribbon was warm against the inside of her wrist, and the small tremor she had spent 9 seasons hiding from London moved, once, through her hand and into the cup. The cup made no sound. She had a long practice at this. The fortnight began then in proper. From the second day of it, the city saw them. They were seen together at the print shop in Pall Mall on the afternoon of a Tuesday. Diana in a deep ruby riding habit that did very well by her colouring. The Duke at her elbow, holding a paper packet of caricatures with the bored attention of a man who has not been entertained by satire for a long time. They were seen at the dinner of Lady Eltham, who had once cut Diana in the rotunda of the British Museum 9 years ago, and who now placed her at the dinner table beside the Duke himself, which is a courtesy a society performs when it has decided to forgive a woman it had previously forgotten. They were seen twice on the steps of the Royal Society lecture rooms, where Diana, who had read every paper of the Linnaeans since she was 16, listened to a lecture on the cultivation of the Camellia japonica, while the Duke stood behind her chair and did not pretend to follow. The Camellia japonica became, before the week was out, the most fashionable plant in 3 drawing rooms. On the Wednesday evening of the first week, the Duke took her to the opera. He had a box on the first tier, and had not used it in 2 seasons. The chairs in it were of red velvet, and the air smelled of orange peel and the dust of unused brocade. The soprano was a woman of impressive volume, and uncertain pitch. By the close of the first act, Diana, who loved music as she loved any precise instrument, had her gloved hands folded a little too still in her lap. The Duke leaned a fraction closer to her in the box. He did not look at the stage. "I observe, Miss Whitmore, that you are wearing the polite face." "I am, Your Grace." "In your private view, how does Signora Pellini come out of the first act?" "In my private view, Your Grace, she does not." A small breath came out of him that was almost a laugh. He turned his face a quarter-inch towards her. "Music," he said gravely, "is the one thing in the world I find more difficult to escape than my mother." "You manage your mother, Your Grace, with a remarkable economy of suffering." "I have taken lessons. Sadly, opera does not permit one to leave the room and write a polite note." She did not, at the moment of his saying it, dare to laugh aloud, because the box was in plain view of 3 other boxes, whose occupants were watching her with the close interest of women learning a new dance step. She lowered her chin instead, an inch, and the small, precise movement near the right corner of his mouth moved with her chin, and then was very carefully still. By the end of the second act, 2 of the boxes had begun to wave gloves at the Duke, with the polite ferocity of women determined to extract an introduction. He did not look up at them. He turned over the program on his knee and said, in the same level voice with which he had read the ledger on the 3rd afternoon, "Miss Whitmore, tell me what you would have written about the cultivation of the Camellia japonica had you been permitted to read your own paper this afternoon at the Linnaean." Diana looked at him. The light in the box was warm and yellow on the brocade behind him, and his profile was the careful, regulated profile of a man who had decided to listen. "I would have written, Your Grace," she said softly, "that the Camellia japonica resents being made the property of a single garden. It is generally happiest in a southern wall, and in the company of a steward who does not interfere with its winter." "A southern wall?" "Yes." "There is one at Hartwell." "I had noticed, Your Grace." He did not answer that at once. He turned the program over once on his knee. "There is a steward at Hartwell, also, who has been instructed not to interfere with the south wall. He has carried out the instruction for 6 years, on the strength of a handwritten note from my brother. I have not, in those 6 years, considered the wall." A pause. "I should be very glad, Miss Whitmore, to consider it now." The third act began with the woodwinds entering on the wrong note. Diana, who had a long practice at not smiling in public boxes, kept her face still. The Duke turned the program over a second time. In the box opposite, 2 ladies set down their fans with the gentle precision of women who had finished their evening's work of observation, and would, by the Morning Post, have written to 4 counties. A morning of the same first week, they walked in the print shop in Pall Mall. Diana stopped at a hand-coloured caricature in the window. It showed an elderly gentleman in a regimental coat presenting a folded paper to a younger gentleman with the exaggerated long nose of a satirist who has decided his subject is not handsome enough to deserve mercy. "That," she said, "is Sir Mannering presenting his resignation. The young gentleman in the picture is the new chairman of the Eastern Counties Bank." "I had supposed the picture to be about a horse." "It is, in a sense, about a horse. Sir Mannering resigned because the new chairman had purchased the horse that the old chairman had been about to purchase." "I see." "It is a great deal of fuss," said Diana, "for one horse." "Was it a fine horse?" "Apparently it was indifferent." "Then we are in the presence of a satirist of unusual generosity to his profession." He bought the print. He had it wrapped in brown paper, and the paper smelt of starch and faintly of the printer's ink that had not yet dried in the back room. He carried it under his arm down Pall Mall, the way a man carries a book of poems he has decided to admit to having read. Diana, walking beside him, found that her gloved hand at the crook of his elbow was unaccountably light, as if the wool of his sleeve were holding it up of its own accord. The wind tasted of coal smoke and the river. She did not, for the count of 40 paces, allow herself to look at his face. She looked at the cold paving stones, and at the small, bright doorways of the print shops, and at the wet shine on a milliner's window, where a row of bonnets in saffron, peacock blue, and ruby silk were arranged in the order of a sentence she had not yet decided to read. "Your Grace," she said, "I had not, in this city, ever been bought a print. I had not, in this city, ever bought a lady one. The two errors are now corrected." "Are you in the habit of correcting errors, Your Grace?" "I am in the habit of acquiring them. The correction is a new accomplishment." The wind, very cold, came down pell-mell and lifted the edge of her bonnet. She set a finger to the ribbon at her throat. He did not look at her finger. He did not need to. But the work, the actual work of the bargain, happened in the Carwell library, in the long hours after the public engagements. The door stayed open to the housekeeper, and the south windows let in a slow afternoon light that turned the leather of the chairs to honey. They read together. They wrote together. Diana had spread on the long table the regimental funds ledger, 3 quarterly reports of the army estimates, 4 letters in her brother's hand from his last station, and a folio of intercepts. Most of the intercepts had been obtained, by methods Diana did not explain and the Duke did not ask, from a friend of Aunt Cordelia's who had married a man at the Treasury. They documented Lord Marbury's private accounts for the previous 5 years. "Ink aging," said Diana on the 3rd afternoon, leaning across the Duke's shoulder to point at a line on the ledger. "Look at this entry. Look at the ones 2 pages back. The colour, Your Grace. The line drawn in 1815 should be browner than the line drawn in 1816, because gallotannate ink oxidizes in air. This line is dated 1815 and is the colour of last summer. It was written in November." "When the embezzlement was first questioned?" "Yes." "Vine wrote it last month." "Vine wrote it last month." The Duke moved his hand. He set it, very lightly, beside her hand on the ledger. He did not touch her fingers. He did not need to. The space between his middle knuckle and her smallest finger was perhaps half an inch, and Diana found, with the kind of small, precise shock that one feels at the first lightning of an approaching storm, that she could feel the warmth of his skin in that gap, as clearly as she would have felt the weight of his ring upon her palm. She did not move her hand. She did not move it. The ribbon at her wrist did not move. The afternoon turned in the long south light, and a piece of coal in the grate cracked. Neither of them spoke for the count of 4 breaths. "Miss Whitmore," said the Duke, in a tone that was almost entirely level. "You may go on." "Thank you, Your Grace. The other ledger entries." The work resumed. Behind them, the housekeeper put down a tray of tea things with the sort of audible delicacy that staff produce when they are pretending not to have noticed something that has cost them a small piece of professional composure. The Duke caught Diana's eye for half a second over the second leaf of the ledger, and the muscle moved at the corner of his mouth. That night, Aunt Cordelia waited up. She was sitting in the small drawing room, the one with the curtain, with her tisane and her book and a careful expression. Diana came in and sat down beside her, without taking off her gloves. "Well, dear," said Aunt Cordelia. "I almost touched his hand," said Diana. "Across a ledger, by half an inch." "And did he move his hand away?" "No." "Did you?" "No." "Ah," said Aunt Cordelia. She set down her tisane. "Then we are at, what do we count, dear? The 7th day?" "The 4th. The 4th? Heavens! I thought it the 7th, the way you came in." "I am being practical, Aunt." "Of course you are, dear. You have always been practical. It is the singular failing of your branch of the family." She picked up her book again and turned a page. "The Duke, dear, is what? 28, I think. And handsome?" "Aunt, I am not in his confidence. I am in yours. Is he handsome?" Diana sat for a moment. She watched the small, steady flame at the wick of the candle by Aunt Cordelia's elbow. The flame moved with the small movement of breath in the room, and was very still otherwise. "He is... yes, Aunt.
He is.
I thought so. Mrs. Bellamy said so in October. She is not often right about persons, but she is reliably right about shoulders. Aunt Cordelia turned another page. Practical girls, dear, fall hardest. You will want to keep that in mind. The 5th day was the day Lord Brookings came to Carwell House. He came in his curricle in the morning, fair and bright and entirely without conscience, and was met at the door by the butler whose face had been a marching band for Diana the week before, and was now, in its own small way, the face of a man defending a flank. The Duke was upstairs in the library with Diana when Brookings was announced. Diana saw the Duke's hand close, once, on the edge of the writing table, a brief, involuntary tightening, like the half-closing of a door against a draught. Then it released. "Show him up," said the Duke. Brookings came in, laughing. He was always laughing. It was, Diana realized on the instant of seeing him in the room with the Duke, the sound a man makes when he has not had a single thing tested in him for a number of years. "Carwell," said Brookings. "I came to see how the matter progresses. Miss Whitmore, forgive me. I had not expected to find you en suite, as it were, in the Carwell Library at—" He consulted a watch he did not need to consult. 10 minutes to noon? "I had not expected to be here, Lord Brookings," said Diana evenly, "until your friend wagered for the pleasure of my company. I assume the term of the bet is current?" 12 days remaining, said Brookings. He was smiling. He did not see the air in the room. He looked at the Duke. "Carwell, a word." The Duke nodded to Diana. "Miss Whitmore, if you would forgive me." "I am perfectly capable of reading a ledger without a Duke standing over me, Your Grace," said Diana. She did not look up from her papers. Brookings flushed slightly. He had, Diana saw, expected her to be flattered by the addressing. She heard the two men go down the corridor and into a small anteroom, and the door shut firmly behind them. She did not move from the table. She bent her head to the ledger. She tried, for the count of 40, to keep her hand steady on the page. The talk in the anteroom lasted 13 minutes by her watch. When the Duke came back, he closed the library door behind him. His mouth was set. "What did he want?" Diana asked, not looking up. "He came to make sure the bet was still in honor." "Is it?" "He is anxious. He has, I think, talked of it. In the club, with gentlemen who would not in the ordinary course have heard of it." "He has talked of it." A pause. "Has he talked of the price?" Miss Whitmore, has he talked of your bargain with me? Has he talked of my brother's case?" No, that he has not. He has not had the wit." "But the bet itself?" "The bet itself, yes. I have told him to stop." "Has he stopped?" "I have told him to stop." "That is not the same answer, Your Grace." She lifted her head. He met her look. He did not look away. He did not, in any visible way, attempt to soften. "It is the only answer I have at present, Miss Whitmore. I am sorry for it." "Do not be sorry, Your Grace. Be quick." She bent her head to the ledger again. After a moment, the Duke crossed the room and sat down opposite her, not beside her, as he had on the 3rd afternoon, but opposite, and picked up the next folio of intercepts and began to read. The morning of the 6th day, a society column in the Bell Weekly Messenger observed, in the manner of a column that has not yet decided whether it is being witty or cruel, that a certain spinster of the Whitmore branch, having abandoned the customary refuges of 9 seasons, has lately been observed in the unaccustomed shape of a Duchess-elect, the Duke in question being the Duke of C, whose attentions to the lady have been remarked by all who pretend not to remark them. Diana read it at the breakfast table. She did not, in the reading, change colour at all. Aunt Cordelia, sitting opposite her, was already reading the 2nd paragraph, which was rather worse. "They have not named you, dear." "They have all but named me, Aunt." "They have given the initial of the Duke and the branch of the family. That is the Bell's notion of discretion. We must be grateful it is not the Morning Post." They are calling me a Duchess-elect. They are calling you a woman about to be made an offer. The two are not, in the present society, the same thing. The first is a description. The second would be an indiscretion. Aunt Cordelia turned the paper. The column ran to the foot. It is, on balance, dear, the sort of column that does not damage a girl who is, in fact, about to receive an offer. It damages a girl who is not. And which, Aunt, are you supposing to be the case here? I am supposing the case to be one of the two, dear. I have not yet decided which. She set down the paper. She picked up her tea. She did not, in the same minute, look at Diana, because she was a woman who knew when a niece needed to be allowed not to be observed. In the afternoon of the same day, the Dowager Duchess of Carwell, Adrian's mother, an immaculate widow of 52, whose calling card had not been refused at any door in London in 27 years, called at Half Moon Street. Aunt Cordelia received her in the great drawing-room, because the small one was felt to be insufficient for a dowager. The Dowager Duchess wore Spanish black, and an expression of forbearance so practiced that it might have been printed on her face by an engraver of unusual skill. Cordelia. Augusta. The two ladies inclined their heads precisely the same fraction. I have come, Cordelia, on a matter that touches both our houses. Then sit down, Augusta. The chair by the fire is least uncomfortable. We do not, in this house, pretend that chairs are anything but chairs. The Dowager Duchess sat. She arranged her gloves. She did not, by any movement of her face, indicate that she had seen the column in the Bell, though it was understood between the two ladies that she had read it at breakfast. Diana, my dear, said the Dowager Duchess, looking at last directly at Diana. I have, as I expect you know, a long acquaintance with your aunt, and a passing one with your mother, who was, I have always been pleased to say, a clever woman. I am sorry not to have known her better. I have come on a matter that concerns my son. Yes, Your Grace. My son has been seen this week in your company. He has not, in any week before this, been seen in any lady's company. He has, in the years since his brother's accident, been a careful and a private man. I have respected that privacy. I have, on occasion, suffered for it, but I have respected it. I am informed, by parties whose informing I trust, that the present association is not a private matter. She inclined her head a fraction. I have not come to forbid you, Miss Whitmore. I have come, on the contrary, to ask whether I may be of use. Diana did not, at once, answer. Aunt Cordelia, beside her on the sofa, did not move. The fire in the grate moved instead, and the small crack of a coal in it filled the space the answer was waiting in. Your Grace, said Diana, I should be very glad of your use. Thank you, Miss Whitmore. I had supposed you might be. The Dowager Duchess set her gloves on her knee. The black kid of them was the precise black of her dress, the precise black of Diana's grosgrain ribbon, the precise black of the painted miniature she had carried in her reticule for 6 years. She did not, however, take the miniature out. That moment would come, a week and 4 days later, when Diana would pass an open library door at Carwell House, and would see the Dowager Duchess sitting alone, with a small framed thing in her lap, and her thumb moving slowly across the painted face of a young officer in scarlet. The elder son, the previous duke, the brother whose name his mother also could not say aloud. Diana would step back from the threshold. She would walk on without speaking, the way one walks on past a person at private prayer. The Dowager Duchess would not have known she had been seen. But that was a week and 4 days off, and the afternoon of the 6th day had its own work to do. I shall do one thing for you, Miss Whitmore, said the Dowager Duchess. I shall, on the evening of the Hartwell ball, walk into the ballroom on the arm of my son and yours. The room will see me do it. That is the use I can offer. Will you accept it? With gratitude, Your Grace. Then we are agreed. The Dowager Duchess rose. She inclined her head to Aunt Cordelia, who inclined her head back. She did not, in the leaving, smile. She did not, however, withhold a small further sentence, delivered at the door without turning round. Diana, my son has not, in 6 years, asked me to do anything for him. He has not asked it of me today, either. I am offering, because it is offered freely that the offer means anything. Pray remember that. She went. Aunt Cordelia, when the door had closed, looked at Diana for a count of 3. Well, dear, that is the Dowager Duchess of Carwell on your side. We shall, at this rate, finish the fortnight with the College of Heralds and the Master of the King's Pavements. Aunt, I am only saying, dear, we are in deep water. I know, Aunt. And you are swimming, dear, which is more than your father ever did when he was put in deep water. Your father, dear, would have drowned by the 3rd afternoon. That night, Lord Marbury called at Half Moon Street. Diana had been expecting him for 2 days. He came at the unfashionable hour of 7, when ladies might be supposed to be at home and gentlemen out, and was received by Aunt Cordelia in the small drawing-room. Cordelia had taken Diana aside in the corridor to murmur, I shall do the introductions, dear. You shall do the listening. We shall sort the talking between us. Marbury was a slim, immaculate man of 58, with silver hair that had not greyed unevenly, the way good silver does not. He had, Diana had once been told, the most fashionable tailor in Mayfair, and the best managed estate in Hampshire, and a private opinion of his great niece that had not been revised in 9 seasons. He bowed. He smiled. He took the chair Aunt Cordelia indicated. He accepted a glass of Madeira. He looked at Diana, with the gentle, considering smile of a man examining a hound he had once thought of breeding from. Diana, my dear, I have come about the unfortunate matter of Henry. I had supposed so, Uncle. Henry is a foolish young man. He is very like his father. I have always said, your father was a sentimental man who married a clever woman, and Henry has the sentiment without the cleverness. Henry is 24, Uncle. He has cleverness enough for that age. Diana. The smile did not change. The voice did. Diana, I have not come to argue family character with you. I have come to make you an offer. An offer? A settlement. I will see to it that the matter of the regimental fund is quieted. I will see to it that Henry's commission is reinstated, with no formal questioning. I will see to it that the present scandal does not reach the senior ranks. In exchange, I shall ask of you a very small thing. Which is, Uncle? That you withdraw from any further appearance with the Duke of Carwell. That you cease this fortnight, this entertainment, this whatever it is, and that you allow me to settle the matter at Horse Guards in my own way, in my own time. I shall, in addition, settle upon you a sum which would allow you a comfortable retirement to one of the smaller of the Whitmore estates. Aunt Cordelia, who had been arranging her shawl with the patient concentration of a woman embroidering, looked up. How much, Marbury? I beg your pardon, Cordelia. How much would you settle upon her? I am taking notes. She produced a small notebook. She uncapped a pencil. I find these things go better with notes. 5,000, said Marbury. The smile had not moved, but the hand on the glass of Madeira had. £5,000, in funds, the day Diana is no longer seen with the Duke of Carwell. 6, said Aunt Cordelia, writing. I am dreaming, dear. We are negotiating. 6 is the proper figure for a girl of 9 seasons returned to her family by hand. Aunt, said Diana. Hush, dear, I am working. Marbury, 6? Or do we waste a further 10 minutes? Marbury did not move. After a moment, a small muscle near his temple, the muscle Diana had not seen in 9 seasons of family dinners, because she had never been an interesting enough subject to provoke it, moved once. 6, he said. He set down the Madeira. 6. Excellent, said Aunt Cordelia. She closed the notebook. She put it into her reticule. She looked up. We refuse, of course. Cordelia. We refuse, Marbury. I had to know the figure in order to know how serious you were. 6 is quite serious. 6 is the figure of a man who believes Diana to be in possession of something he cannot afford to have known. She lifted her chin a fraction. The thing in question, I imagine, has to do with a clerk called Vine, and a ledger that has been written in fresher ink than it pretends to. Have I that right, dear? You have it precisely, Aunt. Marbury, who had not, in 58 years, been faced down in his own great-niece's drawing-room by a 64-year-old aunt in a yellow shawl, was very still for the space of 3 breaths. Then he rose. He inclined his head a quarter-inch. He said, I see, with the courtesy of a man who has miscalculated and will go away to recalculate. He walked out. He did not say good evening. The door closed behind him. Aunt Cordelia sat for a moment, looking at the closed door. Well, dear, she said, you and I will need to be very careful, now, for the next 9 days. He will hurt Henry. He will try, dear. We shall not let him. The 6th and 7th days were the days in which Diana and the Duke worked through the small hours, sometimes until the candles burnt out, and sometimes until Aunt Cordelia sent her carriage to bring Diana home at a respectable distance from dawn. Aunt Cordelia chaperoned with the perfunctory rigour of a woman who had decided the engagement was already public enough that any further pretence of propriety would constitute the actual scandal. She read in the corner. She slept in the corner. Once she snored, briefly, and the Duke caught Diana's eye across the table, and they both, against their will, smiled. The hero's first dry observation came on the 7th evening. It came in the Duke's library, when Aunt Cordelia had at last sent her own carriage home with the message that she would chaperone by post for the rest of the night, and Diana had remained at the writing table for the further hour required to finish her cross-reference of Marbury's private accounts against the regimental fund. She had been reading for 40 minutes without speaking. The fire was low. The Duke had been sitting opposite her, a thin volume of Scandalous open in his lap. Bought, the Duke had told her on the 2nd day, from a stall in Cecil Court the year he was 20, and never reopened since the funeral. And the candle between them had begun to gutter in the way candles do when a room has been holding its breath. Diana said, without looking up. If I'm right about Marbury, he is using the regimental fund to cover a private loan he took out 3 years ago against the Hampshire estate. That is not embezzlement. That is fraud against the Crown. It is the difference, Your Grace, between a private scandal and a public one. Marbury will be ruined. Then we shall ruin him. He is your mother's cousin. Then we shall ruin him politely. The phrase landed in the room. Diana looked up. The Duke was reading Scandalous, not looking at her. The corner of his mouth had moved a very precise fraction. He turned a page with the smallest, dry rustle. Diana, who had been holding herself in a kind of strict architectural composure for 9 seasons and 6 days, laughed. It came out of her before she could prevent it. It was not a polite laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who had not been amused by a man in 5 years. The Duke turned a 2nd page without looking up. Miss Whitmore, he said mildly, you are spoiling my reading. I beg your pardon, Your Grace. It is the politest part. It will not bear interruption. She laughed again. She set down her pen. She looked across the table at him, and at the half-burnt candle, and at the place where the firelight moved on his hair, and on the careful collar of his shirt, where the cravat had loosened by 1/2 inch. And she thought, Oh, this is the place I've been afraid of. This is the place I made the bargain in order to avoid. He turned a 3rd page and did not look at her, and Diana, with the careful precision of a woman placing a glass on a surface that has been polished to a mirror, picked up her pen again and bent her head, and went on with the ledger. The 8th day was a country morning at Hartwell. The Duke had a house at Hartwell, of course. The ball was at Lady Hartwell's, who was no relation, but the Carwell estate was 12 miles away, and the Duke had, without an explicit invitation having been issued, found that on the morning of the 8th day, his curricle was sent up to Half Moon Street. Aunt Cordelia, with the precision of a woman who had made tactical use of a chaperone for 50 years, had decided to accompany her niece into the country. They went. They arrived. They breakfasted on cold pheasant and warm rolls, and the small, bitter coffee Diana favoured, and the Duke, by the second cup, had also acquired the trick of. Outside the breakfast room windows, the south parterre of Carwell House was wintering, the lilac borders bare, the gravel cool, the brass coaching lantern by the side door unlit. Diana set down her cup. "Your Grace, when do the lilacs come out at Hartwell?" "Late April. The hedge by the south wall first. The standards by the south door perhaps a week later." "Why?" "Because I have never been at Hartwell in April. I have only ever seen it in November." "Hartwell in April, Miss Whitmore, is a thing worth being at." "Then when the lilacs come out, Your Grace, I will be at Hartwell." She said it lightly. She said it without taking her eyes from her cup. She heard the small pause on the Duke's side of the table, the pause in which a man hears a future tense and understands it has been spoken to him on purpose. "Then I shall make sure the south wall is in flower," he said, in a tone almost level enough to deceive her. Aunt Cordelia, who had been buttering a roll with the unhurried attention of a person who had decided the ages of England would have to wait for her butter, looked up. "Stewards," she said, "are remarkable creatures, dears. They do whatever they are told. We must remember to tell them." She bit into the roll. She did not say anything further. After breakfast, the Duke walked Diana down to the side door and out into the parterre. There was no sun. There was no wind. The gravel was a dry cold under their feet, and the cold had the small, dry sharpness of a clear November afternoon at the edge of winter. The brass coaching lantern beside the south door, a thing of fluted glass and well-polished metal, the lantern by which the Carwells had been arriving and departing for 4 generations, was unlit. The Duke paused. He laid his hand, lightly, on the post of it. "My brother lit this lantern," he said, "on every evening of his life that he was in the country. I have not lit it in 6 years." Diana did not ask why. Diana, who knew about ghosts because she had been carrying one between her fingers as a length of black grosgrain ribbon for 4 years, did not ask why. She moved her hand. She set it, very lightly, beside his hand on the post of the lantern. She did not touch his fingers. The cold of the brass was the same cold as the gravel under their feet, and the silence between them was the same silence as the breakfast room had held. But the silence was warmer now, on a particular bone in her wrist where her father's ribbon was wound. "Your Grace," she said, "may I light it for you?" The Duke did not answer for a count of 5. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his greatcoat and produced a small striker, silver, monogrammed, his brother's. He laid it in her palm. The metal was warm with the warmth of his body. Diana opened the small glass door of the lantern. She struck the striker. She held the small flame to the wick. The wick took. The yellow flared up. The brass of the lantern caught and held the small new light, and the south parterre had a tiny piece of evening in it, although it was still mid-morning, and the standards of the lilacs along the south wall were bare, and the Duke watched the lantern burning with his hand still on the post, and did not, for the count of 5, breathe out at all. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore," he said. "Adrian," said Diana, "the lantern is lit." It was the first time she had called him by his name. She had not planned it. It came out of her on the same breath the wick had taken the flame from. He turned, slowly. He took her hand from beside his on the post. He held it, not for the gesture of holding it, but for the precise pressure of a hand that has decided something. "Diana," he said, "you may light it any morning you are here." Aunt Cordelia, who was at that moment 15 yards behind them, examining the bark of an apple tree with the close interest of a woman who knew exactly when to be elsewhere, did not turn around. Diana said, very quietly, "I should like that, Your Grace." "Adrian." "Adrian, then." They walked back towards the breakfast room, with the small lantern still burning on its post, and the cold of the parterre between them, and no sun. Aunt Cordelia caught up with them at the door. "Did you see the worm in the bark, dears? Quite ferocious. We must speak to the orchard man." She did not look at the lantern. She did not need to. That afternoon they read by the long table in the Hartwell Library, a brighter, less burdened room than the Carwell Library, with windows facing west. Diana found, between the leaves of a folio she had thought finished with, the document she had been afraid all along they would not find. It was a brief letter. It was in Marbury's hand. It addressed Vine the clerk by his first name. It instructed him in 23 words to make the November entries against Captain Whitmore's commission in the regimental fund. It was dated. It was signed. Diana held it for a long moment without speaking. The Duke saw her face. He came around the table. He read the letter over her shoulder. He did not speak. He took the letter from her hand. He folded it. He put it into the inner pocket of his coat. "Now, Diana, we may do the work properly. Tomorrow I will speak to the subcommittee secretary. The day after, I will sit." She lifted her head. "Adrian, you will not be loved for it." "Diana, I have not, in 6 years, been loved for any single thing I have done. I do not propose to begin caring about that now." He smiled the smile she had seen for the first time in the small drawing room. The careful, brief smile. The smile that did not know it was a smile until it had begun. And Diana, very precisely, found that her hand could not hold the letter, and was glad it was now in his pocket, and not in her own. There remained, before they left Hartwell, the question of Vine. The Duke had taken the precaution, on the morning the curricle came up to Half Moon Street, of sending word ahead to the man of business at Carwell House to summon the clerk, Vine, from Horse Guards, on a matter of clarification regarding the 12th foot. Vine, who was a thin, nervous man of 40 in a shabby green coat, had presented himself at Carwell House at 11, and had been kept waiting in the housekeeper's parlour for 3 hours, which was an act of small, calculated cruelty by the Duke's man of business, and was a length of waiting Vine had been arranging for other people for the whole of his working life. He came in at 3, into the great library at Carwell House. The room smelt of leather and beeswax, and the late afternoon light fell warm and slanted across the long table. The Duke was at the long table. Diana was in the wing chair beside the south window, the cold pane against her shoulder. She had not been introduced. Vine bowed. He took the offered chair. He took a glass of water. He folded his hands. He waited. "Mr. Vine," said the Duke, "I have laid before me 4 pages of the regimental fund's ledger, 3 letters in the hand of the chairman of the subcommittee, and a folio of intercepts from the Treasury. I do not propose to make you my acquaintance with the contents. You have written most of them." Vine, who had been pale, became paler. He did not move. "You will," said the Duke, "in the next half hour, give me a written statement in your own hand. In the statement, you will name the man who instructed you to make the November entries against Captain Whitmore. You will set out, by date, every sum that passed through your hands on his account. You will sign it. You will date it. You will witness it before my man of business, who is waiting in the next room." Vine, who had been opening his mouth, closed it. "In exchange," said the Duke, "I shall not press a charge of forgery against you. I shall write to the 12th foot, by the breakfast post tomorrow, recommending that you be allowed to resign from Horse Guards. I shall not pursue you further. The sum currently outstanding under your name in the regimental fund will be cleared by the Carwell estate at the close of the inquiry. You will be permitted to retire to the country, on a small allowance, which my man of business will arrange. You will not, under any circumstance, be employed in London again." He set his pen flat on the table between them. "Or you will not write the statement. In that case I shall, this evening, lay the documents before the subcommittee, with Mr. Vine named as the clerk in the chairman's interest. You will be removed from your post by tomorrow. You will face an action for forgery against the Crown. The sentence for that, Mr. Vine, I shall not undertake to specify." He paused. "Take a moment, Mr. Vine. There is no hurry. There is a clock at your shoulder." Vine took a moment. The clock at his shoulder. The long Hartwell clock of polished walnut and brass weights, which had not been wrong since the year the Duke's grandfather had bought it, ticked through 11 seconds of professional silence. The fire crackled once in the grate. The cold stone of the chimney breast caught the small, dry sound and held it. Diana, in the wing chair, did not look at Vine. She looked at the south window. She had a long practice at not adding her face to a moment that did not require it. At the 12th second, Vine reached for the pen. He wrote for 35 minutes. He did not look up. He wrote in a clerk's hand of long professional steadiness. He named Lord Marbury at the third line. He named the dates. He named the sums. He named the bank in Hampshire into which the funds had been removed. When he had finished, he laid down the pen. He read what he had written. He signed it. He dated it. The Duke's man of business came in from the next room and witnessed it. Vine stood. He bowed. He did not speak. He left the room with the small, careful step of a man who has just been pulled out of a current he had not realized was about to take him. The Duke folded the statement. He placed it inside the inner pocket of his coat, alongside Marbury's letter of instruction. "That is the case," he said quietly into the great library. "That is the case," said Diana. She had not moved from the wing chair. The south window was at her right shoulder. The cold blue light of the November afternoon was on the carpet between them. The lilac standards along the south wall were bare. The lantern at the side door was burning. The grosgrain ribbon was wound twice round her smallest finger. The Duke crossed to her. He sat down on the broad arm of the wing chair opposite her, not touching her, and laid one hand flat on the back of it 3 inches from her shoulder. "Diana." "Adrian." "I shall not, tomorrow, be at peace with what I am about to do. I shall lay it before the committee. I shall lay it on Marbury. I shall take the consequences. I have not, in this fortnight, been at peace with very many things, however. No. I am at peace with this. I am at peace with you in this room." She turned her head, the small, precise quarter-inch she had been turning it through the fortnight, and she looked at him. The grey-green of his eyes was darker in the late blue light, and the careful mouth was almost unguarded. "Adrian, that is a very dangerous sentence for a man to say to a clever woman." "It is, Miss Whitmore. It is. I am, as you have observed, a slow learner." "You have learned remarkably quickly, Your Grace, by the standards of the species." "By the standards of the species, I am a prodigy of fast learning." "Modest also." "Modesty is the foible of the truly gifted." A small laugh came out of her. He smiled. The careful smile, the brief smile. The smile that had appeared first in the morning of the second day in the library. And the muscle near the right corner of his mouth moved with the smile, and was, for the first time in the fortnight, no longer the only muscle in motion. He stood. He held out his hand. "There is one more place, Diana, I should like to take you before we return to London." He took her down the corridor to the gallery above the staircase. He stopped in front of a painting Diana had not previously been led to. It was a small interior, oils again in a heavy frame, of a young woman of perhaps 20 in a high-waisted gown of dove-grey silk, her face turned 3/4 away. She held a book. The light in the painting was the cold blue light of a north-facing morning. "My mother," said the Duke, "at 20. The portrait was painted the year before her marriage. It is the one likeness of her that does not show her at her work." "She is beautiful." "She is. She has been beautiful since 1782, and shows no inclination to give it up. I owe her the apology of being out of the room when she calls, and the additional apology of having become a man she has not been able to be openly proud of for 6 years. She will not, in this fortnight, have told you that she has read every column in the Bell and Morning Post since you walked into a curtain. She has. Adrian. She is a woman, Miss Whitmore, who has been waiting for me to do one thing she could be proud of since the year of the accident. He inclined his head to the portrait. She will, after tomorrow, be proud of me again. She will not say so, but she will be. He turned. He did not, in the turning, look at Diana. He led her down the gallery, and down the staircase and out by the side door, past the brass lantern, into the parterre where the curricle was waiting. They came back to London that night, late, with Aunt Cordelia asleep across the carriage, and the lantern of Hartwell still burning on its post for the steward to put out at midnight. The road from Hartwell ran black and quiet under the wheels, and Diana watched, through the small window, the cold edge of moonlight on the hedges, and listened, through the soft squeak of the springs, to Aunt Cordelia's regular breathing across the seat. The Duke sat opposite her in the carriage. He had taken off his hat. He had not spoken for an hour. He had been, she thought, watching her face, by the long, inconstant light from the carriage lamp, in the careful manner of a man committing a piece of architecture to memory. She did not look at him. She did not need to. She felt the look on her cheekbone, the way one feels weather coming on the wind. That same night, in a different city, a parallel London of the gentlemen's clubs, Lord Brookings did the foolish thing that ruined Adrian Crewe Halland in the eyes of Diana Whitmore. He did not intend to. Lord Brookings had never intended any actual injury to anyone in his life. He was simply a man whose laughter exceeded his judgment, and who, on the evening of the 8th day of the fortnight, was in his club at his usual chair with his usual companions, and had taken one too many glasses of port. As such men sometimes do, he had pulled a letter from his pocket to lend colour to a story he had been telling. It was a letter the Duke had sent him on the night of the original bet, in the high spirits of a friend writing to a friend, jotted with the ease of a man not yet alerted to consequences. It contained, on its second page, in the Duke's own black-inked, decided hand, the sentence, "Brookings, I will have her on my arm at the Hartwell ball within the fortnight. You may pay 3,000 guineas into the Whitmore account as the price of your wager, and if her gratitude extends beyond the ballroom, you may consider the Carwell line continued at unexpected discount, since for 3,000 guineas one may marry even the spinster of 9 seasons." It was a joke. It was the joke of a man who had not yet met Diana Whitmore. It was the joke a man might forgive himself for 10 years on, if he had been wise enough not to write it down. The Duke had written it down. Brookings, at the club, on the 8th evening, had pulled the letter from his pocket because he had been pressed for an account of the matter, and had wished to give one good story. He had read out the sentence. The men in the chairs around him, 3 of them, had laughed politely. One of them, a thin gentleman of the name Sefton, who had been cut by the late Captain Whitmore at the Carlton races the year before and had not forgiven it, quietly excused himself, went home, and wrote a letter of his own. By the morning of the 9th day, it was in the Morning Post, in the discreet column on the 3rd page, that everyone in London read first and pretended not to. The column did not name the spinster. The column did not need to. There were 9 seasons of Diana Whitmore's. There was one fortnight. There was one Duke. The column quoted the sentence verbatim, and let it lie. By 8 o'clock in the morning, every drawing room in Mayfair was reading it. By 9 o'clock, Diana Whitmore was reading it. She had risen at her usual hour. She had taken her coffee in the small breakfast room of Half Moon Street, with Aunt Cordelia opposite her in the yellow shawl. Aunt Cordelia had been quieter than usual. Diana, looking up, had seen the Morning Post folded by Aunt Cordelia's plate, and had seen on Aunt Cordelia's face the small, still expression of a woman holding the thing she does not wish to hand over. "What is it, Aunt?" "Diana, dear, read your Post first." "What is it?" "Read your Post, dear, please." Diana picked up the paper. She read. She read it twice. She set it down. She did not, in the first instant, say anything. The clock on the mantel struck 9. Outside, a footman could be heard in the area discussing the price of mutton. Diana stood. She crossed to the window. She looked out at the cold morning light on the railings. Her hand was on the velvet of the curtain. She did not move it. She did not move at all. "Aunt," she said after a while, "do you know what is the most precise instrument I have ever used?" "Tell me, dear." "It is a ledger and a candle. Together you can read the age of any sentence in any account book in England. I have been very pleased with my cleverness this fortnight. I have congratulated myself on outthinking the Duke of Carwell." Diana. He had wagered me for 3,000 guineas, Aunt. He had bought my belief with a vote he was always going to cast. He had courted me for the wager. He had named the price of the Carwell line at a discount. She did not raise her voice. She did not turn from the window. "I have been an instrument, Art. I have been a folio of intercepts. I have been a clever girl in a library who could read ink. I have not, this fortnight, been a person." Diana. "I shall not this morning go to the Duke. I shall not this evening go to the Hartwell ball. I shall not in any future see him again." Diana. "Aunt." She turned from the window. Her face was very white in the cold morning light, and her grey eyes were the colour of the river at Hartwell on a November afternoon, but no warmer. "Aunt, please. I shall write to him. I shall write that we have no further business. I shall write that the bargain is paid. He has the evidence. He has my brother's case. He has the means to clear Henry without me on his arm at the ball. He may keep the 3,000 guineas. He may keep the ballroom. He may keep the joke. I will not be the punchline of it." She crossed to the writing desk. She uncapped the inkstand. She wrote. She wrote 9 lines. She sealed them. She rang. She gave the letter to the footman. "Take this to Carwell House. Hand it to His Grace at the door. Do not wait for an answer." The footman bowed. The footman went. Diana sat down again at the breakfast table. The coffee in her cup had gone cold. She did not pick it up. Aunt Cordelia laid down the Morning Post. Aunt Cordelia did not say anything for a long time. At Carwell House, the Duke was at his writing table when the footman came, with a folio of the previous day's notes spread under his hand and a small list of points he intended to make at the subcommittee that morning. He took the letter. He read it. He read it twice. His face, that careful face, that face Diana had spent 8 days learning the muscles of, did not move at all. He folded the letter. He laid it on the table. He stood. He crossed to the south window. He stood at it for the count of 40 seconds, with the signet ring against his teeth and the cold morning light on the side of his face. And then he turned and rang for the butler. "Have my curricle brought round in 15 minutes, he said. "I shall be at the Lord's by 10. The butler bowed. The butler went. The Duke did not, in the 15 minutes, look at the letter again. He did not, in the 15 minutes, sit. He stood at the south window in his shirt-sleeves, with the brandy decanter untouched on the table behind him, and watched the cold light on the railings, and tapped the ring against his teeth, twice, in the precise small rhythm by which a man steadies a tremor he will not give to his hands. At 10 o'clock he was at the Lord's. At 10:15, the subcommittee on army estimates was in session. At 20 minutes past 10, the Duke rose. He had not spoken in the chamber in 3 years. The secretary made a small sound of surprise. Lord Marbury, in the chair, did not move at all. The long practice of 58 years held him still. The Duke looked at Marbury. He held the moment. Then he spoke. "My lords, I should like leave to lay before the committee a series of documents bearing on the regimental fund of the 12th Foot, and on the case presently against Captain Henry Whitmore, and on certain accounts of a private nature held in the name of the chairman of this committee." He inclined his head a fraction towards the secretary's table. "The documents are 6 in number. I propose to read them in order. They will require the attention of the committee for some 35 minutes. I propose, further, to present them on my own authority as a member of this committee, and not under any other interest. I propose, finally, to relinquish the Carwell vote upon the subcommittee for the duration of any inquiry that may follow, in the interest of the propriety the committee has historically expected of itself." He paused. He inclined his head a fraction. "If the committee has no objection." There was no objection. Marbury sat very still. The Duke read. He read for 38 minutes. He read out the letter in Marbury's hand. He read out the ledger entry in Vine's hand. He read out the encouraging observations Diana had made in his own translation. He read out the 3 pages of intercepts from the Treasury. He named the sums. He named the dates. He named the chairman. When he was done, the room was as quiet as a country house at 3 in the morning. He laid the documents down on the long table. He folded his hands. "I should add, my lords, that the wager between myself and Lord Brookings, on the strength of which the public has been variously entertained these past 9 days, will today be paid into a fund established this morning in the name of the 12th Foot for the relief of widows and the orphaned children of veterans of the regiment." He looked, at last, at Marbury. "The figure is 3,000 guineas. The deed of trust has been signed at my solicitor's at 9 o'clock this morning. I have asked my friend Lord Brookings to attend at the solicitor's at his earliest convenience, to add his own name to the deed, in token of his own contribution to the season's amusement. I am sure he will be pleased to do so." A small noise came out of the committee, almost a laugh, almost a breath. Marbury rose. He did not say a word. He gathered his papers. He inclined his head. He walked out. He was not seen at the Lords for 3 weeks. By the end of the month, his Hampshire estate was on the market, and his name was removed from every committee on which it had previously sat. The Duke left the chamber at 11:15. He had Marbury's letter to Vine in his coat. He had the deed of trust at the solicitor's. He had the printed apology of Lord Brookings, which Brookings, being a fundamentally foolish but not fundamentally cruel man, had written at midnight the night before, and had begged the Duke to convey to Miss Whitmore at the earliest opportunity. He did not, however, drive to Half Moon Street. He drove to Carwell House. He went up to the library. He sat at the writing table. He took up Diana's letter, the one he had read twice in the morning. He read it a 3rd time. He did not, in any visible way, soften. He stood. He crossed to the corner of the room. He took down from the shelf the small striker, silver, monogrammed, that he had given Diana on the south parterre at Hartwell on the morning of the 8th day, and which Diana, on returning to London, had pressed back into his hand at the carriage step with a small, "Thank you, Your Grace," and a face he had read at the time as fatigue, and had now to read as something else. He weighed it. He put it into his inner pocket. He rang the bell. "The carriage. I shall go to Half Moon Street at 3. The butler bowed. The butler went. The Duke, alone in the library, sat down opposite the chair Diana had read the ledger in for 6 afternoons, and looked at the place where her hand had lain on the table, and did not weep. The hand had not been there to hold. Outside the south window, a sparrow on the iron railing picked at a crumb of bread. The fire in the grate, which the housekeeper had built up at dawn, settled with a small, dry sound. The clock that had been wrong since the year of the accident struck the half-hour. He sat for 10 more minutes. Then he picked up his coat. At Half Moon Street, Diana had been alone in the small drawing-room, the one with the curtain, since 2 o'clock. Aunt Cordelia had received a message at 1 and had gone out, with the brief explanation of, "I have a small piece of business in Hampshire, dear. I shall be back by 7. Do not let anyone in but the Duke." "Aunt, I have refused to see him." "Then refuse, dear. But let him in first to refuse. The other way round produces neither dignity nor satisfaction." She had gone. Diana sat. She had wound the ribbon at her wrist 4 times and unwound it 3 times. She had taken a book down from the shelf and had not opened it. She had crossed to the window twice and crossed back. She had not, in any of these movements, allowed herself to think of the south parterre at Hartwell, or of the brass lantern, or of the small striker in the Duke's pocket, or of the future tense in which the lilacs would come out, and she would not be at the south wall to see them. She had been, for 2 hours, very careful. At 3:15, the bell rang at the front door. Diana heard the butler in the hall. She heard the deep voice in the hall. She heard the slow, deliberate step on the stair. She did not stand. She sat in the chair beside the small fire and folded her hands in her lap and waited. The Duke came in. He had on his greatcoat. He had not given it to the butler, and his hair was a little disordered from the cold, and his face was the face she had seen in the small drawing room the first evening, when he had been caught and had refused to be ashamed of being caught. He stopped in the center of the carpet. He bowed. "Miss Whitmore." "Your Grace." She did not get up. The grosgrain ribbon was wound twice around her smallest finger. She kept it there. "I have come," said the Duke, "from the Lords Subcommittee. I have laid the case against Captain Whitmore. I have laid it on Marbury. The committee has acted. Your brother is cleared. Marbury is finished." He did not move from the center of the carpet. He did not come closer. "There is a deed of trust at the solicitor's in the name of the 12th foot, to the value of 3,000 guineas, to which Lord Brookings will be required to put his name before the day is out." He paused. "Miss Whitmore, I have come further to say that I have read your letter, and that you are entitled, by the strict letter of the matter, to send it. The bet is paid. The bargain is closed. I have come, in addition to closing it, to ask you a question." She did not answer. She waited. He took, very slowly, the printed apology of Lord Brookings from his inner pocket. He laid it on the small table beside her chair. He took, very slowly, the original letter, the one Brookings had read out at the club, folded once. He laid that beside it. He took, very slowly, from his inner pocket, the small striker she had given back to him at the carriage step. He laid that on top of the letters. The metal was warm with the warmth of his coat. "These," he said, "are the documents bearing on the wager. The first is the apology. The second is the letter I wrote on the night of the original bet, in which the sentence quoted in the Morning Post appears. I have folded it, but I have not torn it. I leave to you whether to read it, whether to burn it, whether to keep it on a shelf where you may produce it when needed." He looked for the first time directly at her. "The third is the striker that lit your lantern. It belongs to my brother. He gave it to me. I gave it to you. I will not ask for it back unless you wish to put it back into my hand." He took, then, a single step closer. "Diana, I will not pretend that the sentence in that letter was not mine. It was mine. I wrote it on the night of the original wager, in the high spirits of a man who had not yet met you, and who, to be honest, did not believe a woman of your description could be met. I wrote it in the assumption that no woman, in any state of soul, would read it." His mouth set. "It has been read. It will not be unread. The sentence is mine. The vote in the Lords was always mine, to give or to keep. I have given it because the case required it, and I would have given it for your brother, whether the bet had been laid or not, since the moment I read the ledger you sent me on the second day of the fortnight." He took, then, a single further step. "I have not, in this fortnight, courted you because the bet required it. I have courted you because I have not, in 6 years, been less alone than when I have been across a table from you reading a ledger. I have, this fortnight, been a fool, in the most public way I am capable of, and I am sorry for it, and I've come to say so to your face, since it is the only way a sorry of any value is delivered." He stopped. He stood. He had said more sentences in a row than Diana had heard him say in the whole fortnight. and he had said them in the careful, even voice of a man laying down the small last possessions he had left in the world. I do not, Diana, ask you to forgive the letter. I ask you to consider that the bet is no longer the contract between us. There has not been a contract between us, I think, since the third afternoon in the library. There has been, since then, a thing for which I do not have a regency word. He drew a long breath. Diana, I am going from here to the Hartwell ball at 8. Lord Brookings will be present. I shall, in his presence, tear the original wager, the bet itself, the slip of paper, the thing on which the 3,000 guineas was first written, a cross in front of his face, and in front of the gentleman who heard him laugh in the club. I shall do it whether you are there or not. The bet does not require you to be there. I require it of myself. He looked at the small striker on the table. He looked back at her. If, at any time before 9, you find that you wish to come to the Hartwell ball, not as a bet, not as a settlement, not as the spinster of 9 seasons, but as Diana, then I will be by the long window at the south end of the ballroom, where I shall remain, alone, until you arrive or until midnight, whichever first occurs. He inclined his head. If you do not come, I shall not come to Half Moon Street again. I shall not write, I shall not call. The Carwell vote will be cast as you would have me cast it, and the south wall at Hartwell will have its lilacs in April, and I shall be at it alone. He paused. The clock above the fire, the clock that was 2 minutes slow, the clock the Whitmore household had refused to correct out of family principle, struck the half-hour. That is the question, he said. Will you come, Diana? She did not, in the first count of 3, answer. In the small drawing-room at Half Moon Street, with the cold November afternoon light on the carpet between them and the small striker still warm on the table, and the ribbon at her wrist wound twice round her smallest finger, Diana looked at him. She looked, with the care of a woman who had been an instrument for 9 seasons and was now being asked to be a person, at the careful mouth and the grey-green eyes and the broad shoulders held very still in the greatcoat that had not been given to the butler. She thought, in the back of her mind, he has done it. He has done what I asked, and he has done it before he asked. He has done it without my being there to make him. And then she thought, with the small, precise interior shock she had felt the first time their hands had been half an inch apart on the ledger, he has come here in his greatcoat. He has not even given it to the butler. He thinks I shall send him away. She did not say either of these things. She rose. She crossed the carpet. She did not, in the crossing, take her eyes from his face. She lifted from the table the silver striker, the small, monogrammed striker that had belonged to his brother, and she held it in her palm. She closed her hand on it. Adrian. Diana. I shall not come to the Hartwell ball at 8. A small thing moved in his face, the smallest of things, a flinch that he caught before it had landed. He bowed. He turned. He took one step towards the door. Adrian, said Diana, I shall come to the Hartwell ball at 7:30. There is no reason, my dear, that you should have to wait alone by a long window until I am pleased to arrive. I shall come with you, in the carriage. I shall stand by the window with you while you tear the wager. I shall make sure that you do it neatly, since you have, I have observed, a tendency to be too courteous with paper. He turned again. His face, that careful face, was now in motion. The corner of his mouth that had moved a fraction so often through the fortnight had finally lost the discipline of moving only a fraction. He laughed. It was the small, honest laugh of the study at midnight, the laugh he had given the portrait of his brother on the first night, the laugh she had not, in the whole fortnight, heard out loud. He came across the carpet. He stopped at half an inch from her. He did not take her hand. He waited. Diana, who had been waiting 9 seasons to be waited for, laid her hand on the lapel of his greatcoat. She felt, through the wool, the small, steady pulse of him. Adrian, she said, I have not been a person in 9 seasons. I have not been a person, Adrian, until the 3rd afternoon in your library. You are not, in my view, to be forgiven for the letter. You are to be required to live, for some considerable time, with the fact that I shall, periodically, produce it from a drawer and read it aloud, to remind you that you were once a man who wrote a sentence like that. A muscle moved at the corner of his mouth. You may keep your 3,000 guineas in the regimental fund. You may keep your apology. You may keep your striker. It is your brother's, and you shall light the Hartwell lantern with it for the rest of your life. I shall light it with you. She lifted her chin a 1/4 inch. There is a future tense, Adrian, that I should very much like to live in. I should like, my dear, to be at the south wall when the lilacs come out. He bent his head. He did not, in the bending, kiss her. He laid his forehead very lightly against hers, the wool of his greatcoat cool on her cheek, his breath warm above her brow. Diana, I would tear 100 wagers. Tear the one, Adrian. The one is enough. The one. Yes. Aunt Cordelia came back at 6. She had, in Hampshire, called upon the wife of Lord Marbury's bailiff, a woman whom Aunt Cordelia had known as a girl in Bath, and had taken the precaution of obtaining a written list of the dates upon which moneys had moved between the Hampshire estate and Vine the clerk. She did not, at her return, hand the list to anyone. She put it into the writing desk, and locked the writing desk, the way a woman locks a paper in a drawer that may be needed later in the season. She found Diana and the Duke of Carwell at the small writing desk, drafting between them, line by line, the letter Diana would send the next morning to Captain Henry Whitmore in his regiment, to tell him that the matter at Horse Guards was resolved. She paused in the doorway. She regarded the scene for the space of 3 breaths. Tea, dears. Tea, please, Aunt. Duke. Tea, Mrs. Whitmore, would be the kindest thing in the world. I am not Mrs. Whitmore, Your Grace. I am Aunt Cordelia. You may begin practicing. We do not, in this family, waste time on a courtship after the engagement has been informally accepted on the small drawing-room carpet. She rang the bell. She crossed to the fire. She picked up her book. She did not look at the small striker on the table, or at the apology of Lord Brookings folded beside it, or at the bet letter folded beside that, or at the ribbon at Diana's wrist, which was now wound 3 times round her smallest finger, and one of those times round the Duke's. She turned a page. Hartwell at 7:30, she said, to the room in general. I shall have on the emerald. Diana, you shall have on the ruby. Duke, do not ride in the curricle. You shall wrinkle the dress. You shall come in the chaise. We shall arrive, all 3, in the manner of persons who have nothing to apologize for. Aunt. Yes, dear. Thank you. Do not mention it, dear. I have been pleased with you this fortnight. At 7:20, the chaise was at the door of Lady Hartwell's. Diana was on the Duke's arm. She had on the ruby ball dress, a deep ruby silk that did, as Aunt Cordelia had been promising for 9 seasons, very well by her colouring. And the black grosgrain ribbon, the one that had been at her wrist for 4 years, was no longer at her wrist. It was at the Duke's now, wound once round the cuff of his black coat over his pulse, where she had placed it at the chaise step, in lieu of a betrothal ring she did not yet have. The Duke held his arm a little stiffly, the way a man holds himself when he is carrying something he has been entrusted with. The footman opened the door. The ballroom of Lady Hartwell's was the long-fashioned ballroom, with the brass chandeliers and the long south window that looked out over the river, and 1,000 candles burning, and the ton of London assembled. The majordomo announced them. His Grace, the Duke of Carwell, Miss Diana Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore. A silence, a small, precise silence, fell upon the room, of the kind that falls when a story finds its ending in public. Lord Brookings, by the south window, in a cream waistcoat and the high spirits of a man who had not yet decided whether to be ashamed of himself, stepped forward. He bowed, The Duke inclined his head. He did not let go of Diana's arm. He led her across the parquet to the long south window. He drew from the inner pocket of his coat, slowly, deliberately, with the precision he had used at the writing table at 4 in the afternoon, the original slip of paper on which, 8 days ago, Lord Brookings had written the figure of 3,000 guineas, and his initial and the date. He held it up. He held it up high enough that the chandeliers caught it. He did not raise his voice. He tore it. He tore it once across, then twice, then 4 times. He let the pieces fall to the parquet at his feet. He inclined his head to Lord Brookings, and to the gentlemen of his club behind Lord Brookings, and to the ton of London. There is no bet, gentlemen. There never was. Miss Whitmore is here on her own terms. The Carwell line will be continued, if she pleases, at the price of being treated for the rest of my life as the most clever creature in any drawing-room in England, at no other discount. I trust the matter will not arise again. Then he turned to Diana. The chandeliers were over them. The brass lantern of Hartwell, the one Diana had lit on the south parterre on the morning of the 8th day, was burning, 12 miles away, on its post, where the steward had been instructed to keep it lit for the duration of the season. The ribbon at the Duke's wrist was warm against his pulse. Diana looked up at him. She lifted her chin in the small, precise way she had been lifting it for 9 seasons. But the lift was different. It was the lift of a woman who had been an instrument, and was now an instrument, that had decided, on its own, to be a person. "Miss Whitmore," said the Duke. "Adrian?" He smiled. He did not, in the smile, conceal it. "Miss Diana Whitmore, would you do me the honor of opening the floor with me?" "I should be delighted, Your Grace." She did not, in the saying, raise her voice. She did not need to. The room watched them. The room had nothing else to do. They walked together to the center of the floor. The musicians struck. The floor opened. They danced. 5 weeks later, in April, the lilacs came out at Hartwell. They came out, as the Duke had said they would, on the south wall first. Long, sweet bursts of pale lavender against the warming red brick. And on the standards by the south door a week later, as he had also said. Diana, who was by that time, by the ordinary courtesies of the period, and the very particular impatience of Aunt Cordelia, the 7th Duchess of Carwell, came down on the morning of the 15th of April to the south parterre, alone. Adrian was at the Lords. He had taken his seat in earnest now, and the Committee on Army Estimates had, at his own quiet request, been reconstituted with a new chair, and Captain Henry Whitmore had been promoted out of his old regiment and now sat at a polished desk at Horse Guards, drafting reports in his own quite recognizable hand. The brass coaching lantern at the south door, which Diana had first lit on a cold November morning, was still burning. The steward had kept it lit, as the Duke had asked, since the 8th day of the fortnight. Diana paused at the post. She laid her hand on it. The metal was warm under her palm, with the slow accumulated warmth of long burning. She looked up at the south wall. The lilacs were heavy with the first cool flowers of the season. She drew, from the pocket of her morning gown, a thing of warm amber silk that did, as Aunt Cordelia had been saying, very well by her colouring. The small monogrammed striker that had belonged to Edward Crewe Halland, the 6th Duke of Carwell, the elder brother whose name Adrian had not, until the night of the 8th day of the fortnight, been able to say aloud in the room he had inherited. She laid it on the brass plate beside the lantern. She did not need it. The lantern was already lit. She stood a moment in the cold morning April light, with her hand on the post, and the river at the far end of the parterre showing through the lilacs in a thin, bright ribbon, and she heard, behind her, the small, steady step of the Duke coming back from the Lords earlier than expected. He came down the gravel. He stopped beside her. He laid his hand beside hers on the post. He did not say anything for the count of 4. The lilacs caught the last of the morning sun. A sparrow on the parterre wall picked at a crumb of bread. The cold of the brass and the cold of the gravel with the cold of a morning that was about to turn warm, and the south wall held its first lilacs of the year. Diana turned her head. She looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at her. "The lantern is lit, my love." Adrian closed his hand over hers on the post of the lantern, the black grosgrain ribbon at his wrist warm against her thumb. "Diana, the lantern is lit." If you have stayed with us by the fireside to the end of this story, the story of a spinster of 9 seasons, a duke of a ruined reputation, one bet, and the fortnight in which neither of them, in the end, escaped, then we are very glad of your company. There are more such evenings to come at Adrian's fireside. If you would care to hear them, take a moment to subscribe, and we shall save you the chair by the south window. Until then, dear listener, good evening, and sleep well.